So she was complaining to my father. She said, I went on shlichus in order to have chassidishe kids, but I don't see that, happening. And my father told her, that's not true. We didn't go on shlichus to have chassidishe kids. We went on shlichus because the Rebbe wants us to go and do a mission.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2023. My name is Bentzi and I will be your host. Let's begin. Alrighty, so we're here in Crown Heights, in the Kinnis, in the heart of the Kinnis. We are in this apartment because we needed to find a pach shemen, a quiet space in Crown Heights during the Kinnis, and we found it underneath the cracks. And so we are here. And I'm joined by Levi Greenberg, a good friend from back in the day in Yeshiva, who grew up and still lives in El Paso, Texas. The way this conversation came to be is a couple weeks ago, I released the episode with my brother Mendy, and Levi reached out to me and told me that he had listened to the episode, and while he wasn't disagreeing with the episode, he felt that some of the ideas that we had discussed, or some of the ideas that I had put forth, some of the theories I had put forth, were not telling the whole story, that there's more to the story. And to be honest, I very much appreciate that feedback, because you don't always want the feedback where someone agrees with everything that you say. First of all, because usually it's suspect who believes everything that you say. Second of all, it's, you either, for me at least, the best feeling is to have your idea tested and to hear other ideas, or to hear what, to have your idea pushed back at. That's part of learning, that's part of growing, that's part of thinking. So I very much appreciated that Levi reached out. I very much appreciated how he reached out, and so I invited him to come on the podcast, and here we are. So do you want me to lay out? I don't think I need to lay out what was said in the podcast. I think you could say what are the things that you remember from it, and what you wanted to talk about. You know what? Why don't you first introduce yourself, where you're from, who you are, and so on. What do you do?
So, as you said, my name is Levi Greenberg. I'm from El Paso, and still am from El Paso. I wasn't born in El Paso. I was born here right next to Crown Heights, Brookdale Hospital. But 3 months later, my parents were sent on shlichus, or we were sent on shlichus to El Paso. And I grew up there. I left home fairly early. It was before the time of the shluchim online school. You weren't able to learn online. And I left when I was approximately 10 years old. And I came back after I got married. When I was 25, we came back on shlichus to El Paso. Been there ever since.
Right. Ever since. You're not that old. It's not that long ago.
12 years?
All right. Yeah, I need to make you feel that. So what was it on that podcast, and that conversation with my brother that?
So it was a very interesting podcast, a very interesting story. And as I mentioned, I'm not here to comment on anyone's journey, and everyone's journey is theirs. But one of the theories or the ideas that you were discussing was that this concept of having, a Lubavitcher couple go and be shluchim in some foreign place, in a foreign atmosphere, outside of Crown Heights, outside of a Lubavitcher community, and then expect that the children who never really grew up in that atmosphere should be able to seamlessly transition into the system, for lack of a better word, or into just a regular yeshiva atmosphere, is an abstraction that doesn't necessarily work. Or I'm not going to nitpick anything that you said. I don't remember the exact words.
You didn't remember the ACS? Abstraction.
Yeah, an abstraction that doesn't necessarily work, or something like that.
Right.
And so I felt that characterizing it that way, as you said, is not showing the entire picture. Because while everyone has their journey, this concept of, the Rebbe sending shluchim to places that are very foreign to, the Lubavitcher atmosphere, to say the least, and also to ensure that the chinuch of their children would not be compromised as a result, it does work. The question, and the question is how and why and whatever. And I'm not here to set forth a path of how exactly it does work. But the fact of the matter is, if you look back at the past 60, 70 years that it's been going on, there is tremendous success, specifically in that in that line. So I felt that it was just important that while not pushing back at anyone's specific story, let's not characterize it as, this is the situation with shlichus and chinuch.
Fair enough. I mean, I fair enough. I appreciate the pushback in itself. I also appreciate the gofish linear, the actual pushback. My intention was not to say that it cannot work or that it does not work. What I meant was it does not have to work, right? And I think that's what I meant by abstraction, is that, because on paper everything kind of checks out, shluchim are, diehard Lubavitchers, or they're pure Lubavitchers, and so their kids that grow up on Shlichus are even pure Lubavitchers, and so a pure Lubavitcher kid who grew up, not only went on Shlichus, but grew up on Shlichus, obviously he'll fit into yeshivas. That all works on paper, but in real life, where and by real life I don't mean that it's more real than the abstraction. I just mean that it's the life, the reality of messy relationships and right, where
Gullus, whatever.
It's not even gullus. It's a fact that like I was talking to my brother, like, a kid grows up with a daily interaction with his classmates and his friends and the world around him, and it's a famous story of the, it's brought in philosophy. It's a famous story of the cave, but I think it's also brought in chassidishe about it's a mashal of some sorts about gullus. You just said gullus, where you have a family that's in a pit for a long time. And over generations, they begin to get used to it, and someone tells them that there's a whole world out there. The whole world is out there. That is true. But for the child in the pit, it's an abstraction, right? And so that, to me, is what I was saying. Not that it cannot work, and not that it hasn't worked, but that it doesn't have to work.
Right.
And for many, it doesn't work, right? And, was that an indictment of the system per se? It was an indictment of a certain blindness in the system, right?
Taking it for granted.
No, but a certain blindness in the system. If people, we could spend now 3 hours trying to define what the system even means. I feel like the system is.
I'm not here for that.
Yeah, you're not here for that, and nobody listening to it is here for that either. And the reason why I feel like that's a useless conversation anyway is because I always feel that the system is brought up usually to deflect from personal responsibility or more specific responsibility. So it's much easier to talk about this abstract monster. Like, who exactly is deep state? Who exactly is this system? Who is the guy? Who do we talk to? Where's the address of the system? Where is the complaint box for the system? Nobody has these answers. It's much easier just to punch into the air and talk about the system, right? So I don't think it's worth to talk about the system per se. But is this an indictment, or is this a critique of a perspective by chinuch in schools, or in general in our community, where we assume that kids growing up on shlichus are, because they're Lubavitch on paper, means that they're Lubavitch in the way that a kid that grew up in a Lubavitch community is Lubavitch, right? We cannot forget about the real lived experienced identity for the kind of abstract identity. That's my point. Okay,
yeah, I understand that.
Right, right. So you feel that there's more. That there's another side of the story. So why don't you talk a little bit about that side of the story?
So, let's put it this way. There's a lot of different shluchim out there, a lot of different circumstances, a lot of different realities. There are shluchim in larger cities, smaller cities, some that have chinuch. I'm talking about brick and mortar schools that they can send their kids to, whether they're a Lubavitch school or a frum school or anything. And then there are those that have nothing. and Baruch Hashem that there's a shluchim online school and kids are able to get a chinuch, and it does a tremendous job. And my kids now are on the shluchim online school because we don't have an option, a viable option to send them to. When I was growing up, so we were in El Paso. There was an El Paso Hebrew Day School. A variation of it does exist today. It's not from school at all. It was co-ed, obviously. And when I was in first grade, when I was in kindergarten, I went there. When I was in first grade, I went for the entire day, but I transferred over to a different class. First and second grade, I was there the entire day, which means even secular and Limudei Kodesh. But the teachers that taught Limudei Kodesh for those classes, they were actually Shomer Shabbos, which is interesting. I didn't realize until later that that's what my parents were specifically looking for, that at least whatever Yiddishkeit I'm learning anywhere else should be from someone who is a Shomer Shabbos. But then that couldn't continue, so I continued to go to the school for secular studies so that I should have some type of social interaction. And my parents started to bring in post-seminary girls or seminary girls. You're talking here, 1994, 95, 96. And they came. They would be there for the year, and they taught me. So they taught me Chumash, and they taught me all the regular things that you learn in school. So I was tutored. So I would go to the day school for half the day for secular studies. I would come home and I would learn Limudei Kodesh. When I was in fourth grade, my parents decided that I have to go to a normal school, a regular Lubavitch chinuch. So it was right after Pesach. My birthday is a little bit after Pesach. So I was 9. I was going on to 10. And they told me that they arranged that I should go and spend a month in Chicago to go to the cheder there. And I did. And Baruch Hashem, I don't know exactly who specifically to credit, but my friends in class, they were amazing. They embraced me right away. Like I had friends immediately. The teachers were amazing. Rabbi Aaron Wolf was the teacher in fourth grade. And in fact, I was so comfortable, being in his class, and he was so welcoming. Actually, the next year, I boarded in his house, and I stayed there for 4 years.
Really?
From 5th through 8th grade. That first month, so I was by cousins, the Greenbergs that lived in Chicago then. They were wonderful. But the kids were much younger, and I just wanted to be in a I guess, older family. And so since that month worked out very well, so my parents decided, okay, continue there. And in 5th grade, that was my first regular year in the Cheder Lubavitch in Chicago, and it was amazing. It was great.
Was it hard to be away from home?
Definitely. Definitely it was hard to be away from home. All the typical things about, homesickness. I'm sure you know exactly what this is.
We're in the right place for homesick, yeah.
Exactly. Oh, homesick for Lubavitch. But I'm saying you
grew
for
up Paso in this case, yeah. Homesick
you grew up dealing with this as well, I imagine.
Yeah, very much so. I really want to hear more about it because I think this is something that is really not discussed. I'm not sure why, but this is, it's a big, it's deep down there in my psyche from my own experience. So that's why I'm asking you, when it seems like you were very lucky because this is very unusual to find a place that you would feel comfortable to stay for the next 4 years.
Well, it wasn't my plan in 5th grade.
But
it turned out that's what happened.
In retrospect, you found a place that you were very comfortable with. The proof is that you spent 4 years there.
100%.
Right? And 4 years for anybody that's stayed at someone else's home, it could be a lovely family, but usually within a few months you feel very much unwanted there.
No, this was just the
clearly
opposite.
You didn't. So you were very lucky and very fortunate, and probably had to do with your personality as well. So you don't want to give all the blame to the other people. You must have done something right as well, but you were fortunate that it ended up that way. And even so, you're saying it was hard for you to be away from home. So what precisely was that makes sense. Obviously, it's hard to be away from your parents, but just talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about the process, the emotional process. It for me at least, and I really want to hear more from you about this. A lot of the feelings that I remember from my age of that time, because it's already 25 years away, is associated with being away from home.
Right.
Like I don't remember so many feelings, emotions, moments. Like the powerful stuff is from there, which says a lot. So, what do you remember from the feelings that you had back then?
So obviously that first month it was exciting. Go away
Right.
from home. I'm a big boy. I was traveling alone. Unaccompanied
Right.
minor. That type of
Unaccompanied
thing.
minor. Yeah.
So it was just from Pesach to Shavuos. Shavuos I came home and there was camp at home. A boys' camp. It was good. Then I came fifth grade. So for Elul I came. I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it was. And I think for Rosh Hashanah I was back home already. So so from Rosh Hashanah till Simchas Torah I was home. I distinctly remember waking up Matzeh Simchas Torah. I had a flight, 12 o'clock, whatever it was, the direct flight to Chicago. And I remember waking up and saying, I'm not going. I remember saying that. But it's not like there was an option for me to stay school-wise. In other words, already in my mind, I was not going back to the school that was in El Paso. Wonderful people, great. But I knew that I had to be
You
in
knew
a
that it
different
wasn't for
environment.
you, right?
I had to be in a different environment, and I was happy in the school. When I woke up, Matzah Simchas Torah, I said, I'm not going. It had nothing to do with anything wrong with where I was going.
Right.
The Wolves were wonderful, and in Chicago, the Cheder was also wonderful. But just, a kid doesn't want to leave home, and I said, I'm not going. And my parents were very patient, and, they packed me up and this and that, and I'm like saying the whole time, I'm not going, not going. But I was going. And I remember I was in the airport, and I still said I'm not going. And, my parents took me all the way to the plane, and I went. Years later, I think after I got married, my mother told me that as soon as I disappeared, my father tells my mother, if he would have said I'm not going one more time, I would have taken him back home. She was like, why'd you wait? So I realized actually later on when I became a parent, and now, Baruch Hashem, my oldest is also away from home this year. I realized that no matter how hard it was for me, whatever it was, for my parents, it was much harder. And I'm not here to feel for them. That's not the point.
Yeah.
And being a parent myself, I could see where that comes from. Children are resilient. Kids, obviously depends on the child, depends on the circumstance, depends on everything. But if you ask me like specific feelings, I remember certain episodes of homesickness. I remember distinctly that the last time I cried for being homesick was when I was in sixth grade. I landed after Tishrei. I remember that first night I woke up crying. Mrs. Wolf saw me crying. I came to the kitchen. She was like concerned for me, whatever. She gave me something to eat. It was the last time I cried. I've cried since, but not, not for homesickness.
To be honest with you, I really didn't think we were gonna go here because you actually told me before we started speaking that you didn't want to speak about your own story, but yet we are talking about it, and for whatever reason, I'm not at the brink of tears, but a lot is welling up inside of me. The emotions that this is bringing up, and the fact that I'm not crying probably says something that I need to explore. But you're kind of papering it over here. If you think about it, you're kind of papering it over here. There's a number of parts here that you need to dissect. Yes, you understood as a 10-year-old that you had to go, but it was you're like it was a bigger deal for your parents than it was for you. Yeah. $1,000,001 is more money than $1 million. They're both $1 million.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Your parents are dealing with different kinds of feelings than you are, mainly because they're adults, but also because they feel a massive burden of guilt and responsibility, which you don't have because this wasn't your fault. You're dealing with, as a child, the very I think the only fair word is traumatic. And I'm not someone who bandies that word around all the time whenever like something's difficult. I think it is overused, but taking a child out of their home space and voluntarily moving, if it's involuntarily, maybe it's even worse, but for a child to feel that they cannot be at home and they have to be somewhere else, it's rough. It's rough, and it's confusing. It's confusing. I feel like what you're trying to say, and this is something that I identify with, is that maybe you're not angry at your parents because you understand that they weren't putting something on you that they weren't putting on themselves. I mean, that to me, if that's what you're trying to say, that to me is a fair point. I mean, but I mean, I'm very well aware how difficult it was for my parents, to the point that I remember distinctly that, I mean, there was a time where I wasn't like, I left home, and then eventually I couldn't leave home. Like, it was just, it was too much. I just psychologically couldn't deal with it. And then when I was older, and especially when it came to yeshiva and there were more boys in the dormitory, I was able to do it. But even then, I remember distinctly that I would come to the airport with my parents, and we lived in Hong Kong, so this was an international flight. My point is, they didn't bring me to the gate. They brought me to security, and that was it. I would say goodbye, and I left. I did not linger. And the reason I didn't linger was not because I have a heart of stone. It's quite the opposite. I could not deal with that moment. I just said, okay, the day before, it was a pit in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I also knew that on the other end of the flight, I'd be fine. I liked the yeshiva I was in for the most part. I'll be okay. But that moment of separation, I mean, bro, it's rough. It's rough, and I mean, I don't know, if we're going to be honest, we may as well be honest. I would think in some ways that's true for me to this day. I mean, when I like, my parents still live in Hong Kong, and I see them less regularly. I mean, maybe at this age I would have moved away anyway, but like, they're on the other side of the world, and it's so ingrained in me that when it comes time to say goodbye to my parents, whether it's after simcha or after a visit or whatever it is, I literally, I say goodbye, I turn around, and I leave. I cannot deal with it. Anyway, right. I mean, that's all to say.
Now we're hearing your story.
I know, but I don't want to make up my story. I couldn't help myself. But I'm saying, like, you're kind of downplaying it. You're making as if, and I want to know where that's coming from. Like why do you feel it's important to bring up that your parents had a harder time than you? I believe it.
So I'll tell you, it's one of the reasons why I was actually reluctant to go down this, path, right. Simply because, okay, let's put it this way. When I look back at my childhood, I have zero, how you say, bad feeling. I mean, life is life. People right. go through challenges, and I had my fair share of them, and things like that. But I don't look back at the circumstances of my childhood. Growing up in a place which didn't have a chinuch for me, and then having to leave when I was a little kid, 10 years old, and essentially being away from home. I don't look back at that as an abnormal type of childhood. I consider myself being very lucky to have a very happy childhood, and I'm actually thankful. Looking back, I'm thankful that I actually did go in 5th grade. Right. I don't want to, engage in, what ifs. But I highly doubt that I would be who I am if I didn't leave then, if I didn't right. enter the system or enter that environment at that point. And I'm keenly aware of that.
Right.
So in other words, so now is it about, me trying to cover over trauma? And I don't know. And it's not even what I'm trying to the reason why I bring up that they had a harder time. The reason why I say that is because I want to point out that for some reason, at least in my experience of it, which I definitely did feel homesickness, it was rough, all that. At a certain point, it kind of like I snapped into a certain reality where, okay, this is life and this is what it is. Were there times, in 7th grade or 8th grade that I don't know, I would feel like, oh, I wish my parents were. Of course, I had that. But for the most part, this is my life and I'm happy, doing right. this. And I don't know if that ever got easier for my parents. That's what I'm saying.
I see.
In fact, most recently, I overheard someone speaking to my father and asking him, what's the hardest part of Shlichus?
Yeah.
He said, chinuch, period. Everything else, whatever. Not a walk in the park, but we can handle it. Kosher, this, that, doesn't matter. He said, chinuch, that's just the toughie. And that's why, all of these stories that, I'll tell you a story
but one second. I'm not trying to divert, but when I've heard shluchim say that before, they say chinuch is the toughest part. Let's be honest.
Not Aleph Beis Gimel.
Let's be honest. By chinuch they mean sending away their kids.
Yeah. That's what I mean. That's what he meant also.
I know that's what he meant, but I'm saying we use these kind of there's a word for it. Like when you
euphemisms or whatever.
We use euphemisms to like chinuch. I'm not making money. I'm making parnasa. You're making green cash, and you're sending your kids away from home. Let me see that. That's what you're referring to.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, go ahead.
As arranging for the right teacher or making sure the kid gets an A. That's not
Right.
chinuch.
Right.
So my mother told me a story recently. I don't know, a few years ago. She said that when I was very little, I was 4 or 5 years old, we would come to New York. I don't want to say often, but like every summer we were here for 2-3 weeks, and we would stay in Crown Heights. This was our time to come to the Rebbe. That's when we saw the Rebbe. This is before Gimel Tammuz. And my mother said that she noticed that, so this is what, Nun Aleph, Nun Beis, and even Nun Gimel. So very often there was in Nun Gimel especially, there was a siren, the Rebbe's coming out to the balcony. So we would stay by cousins, and there were cousins my age. Whenever this would happen, she noticed that the kids that grew up in Crown Heights, they were all excited. It was like, fire under their, and then they would run, hey, the Rebbe's coming out. And she noticed that her Levi doesn't, whatever, he went, but she didn't see that fire. So she was complaining to my father. She said, I went on Shlichus in order to have chassidishe kids, but I don't see that, happening. And my father told her, that's not true. We didn't go on Shlichus to have chassidishe kids. She's like, what are you talking about? And he shared with her the Sikha from Purim Tavshin Chaf. The Rebbe spoke about the Peace Corps, right? That President Kennedy, he made a Peace Corps, and he's sending out people to go to these third world countries to live there and be with the people and I guess educate them, but they're going to have to live with the people, and they're not going to get good pay, and they're not going to be able to eat the regular foods, etc. And they have to do it, for the right reasons and being altruistic about it and have a mission. And the Rebbe was speaking about this in regards to Shlichus, that the whole idea of Shlichus is, going out, doing the mission, doing what has to be done, without expectation of what's going to come as a result. And my father told me, he said, we went on Shlichus because the Rebbe wants us to go and do a mission. I'm not going to talk here what the mission is. Everyone knows. What's going to happen in the end with our personal situation. The Rebbe is a gutter, and he promises that things will be okay, and he gives his bracha, etc. But I'm not measuring, I'm not, determining if this was a good investment on my part based on, if my son is running to 770 because he's excited or not, or if he's, called chassidishe or not. I never heard about this conversation until a few years ago. Yeah. And it was actually eye-opening to me. Right. Because looking back, whether it was in the way my parents behaved or what they told me, I could tell very, very clearly that they knew they have a mission, they have a reason to be here. They love their family and they want their family to have the best possible, begashmias, and also beruchnias, and therefore they are willing to put themselves out there and send children away to have that chinuch, etc. But it was never it never clashed with their commitment to the shlichus. Right. And so it was never like this struggle of are we getting our money's worth? Are we getting our investments worth based on how the chinuch is coming along and how the kids are doing? I forgot where I was going with this, but
I'm very glad you went there, because it's something that I think about a lot. I am no longer on shlichus, so in some ways, the point is more relevant to you, I'm sure, than it is to me. But I grew up on shlichus, and there is this kind of discussion that your mother and father had is to me is like a general conversation that Lubavitchers have and maybe have with themselves, or it's kind of two sides of the conversation, which is there's a famous thing of the Rebbe said about the shluchim's kids, of meine places, right? That he takes a chayes, so that's how it's translated. He takes a chayes for the shluchim's kids, and I've always felt that that's a very superficial reading. If that story happened the way it said it happened, which is I don't know, but let's say that interpretation to me is a pretty shallow interpretation, because what that assumes is that, like you said, shlichus has to work out perfectly because that's what the intention was. You also hear this, to put it in a different framework, a lot of times people want to make as if shlichus is a win-win-win all across the board.
Nothing in life is
right,
that.
Right. But shlichus is the thing where, how many times have you heard that you look at shluchim's kids, look how they turned out. Maybe today people say that less for different reasons, but when I was a kid, when I was growing up, it's very often like they would send people on shlichus and look at how their kids turned out. I just heard 2 weeks ago on my podcast, someone was saying, on shlichus, kids grow up learning to share, and people try to find the benefits that come out of shlichus, and I'm sure there are benefits that come out of shlichus, right? I'm not here to rag on shlichus, right? I grew up in a Chabad house. I saw a lot of beautiful things that were happening in that Chabad house. I'm happy to extol the praises of shlichus. Okay, that's not my mission, but to say that it's a net, like it's only upside, and there was everything has to work out perfectly because it's shlichus, to me is insane, right? So that to me is basically what your father's answering, that shlichus is not because everything will work out. That's not why I go on shlichus, because everything's going to work out. Right? I went on shlichus because there is a mission that I was sent to accomplish, right? And everything else, hopefully it works out. Maybe yes, maybe no, right?
Right.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, I would say even more. You're saying that, it doesn't have to work out. One could say, and maybe this is the heart of what we're kind of if there is a debate here, this is the heart of the debate, which is, I would even say that maybe there's no way that it can work out across the board, right? There's no way that it can work out across the board. Shlichus, you're sending out thousands of couples around the world, right? And couples raising a family, in the best of cases, have it hard. It's a challenge to raise children that they're well psychologically, physically, spiritually, religiously. All of these things are challenges, right? Now, you take these couples and you spread them thin in these different communities where they have no support network, not family, not friends, right? They're isolated, right? Assuming that they are in the best place to begin with, that's already a massive, probably impossible challenge, right? But a lot of them were not. Well, let's be honest. A lot of couples that went on a shlichus went with baggage to begin with, because really everybody has baggage, right? So you're sending out on shlichus, right? People that have to begin with challenges. Now you're putting a even bigger challenge on them, and they have to raise a family on top of everything else that they have to do, and they have to figure it out from scratch, right? Because they're in a place that nobody else was before, and very often nobody else comes after. Okay, so that I don't want to use the word system, but that situation, to me, is not going to end up with roses across the board. There's going to be challenge. There's going to be fallout. The
Rebbe would talk a lot about the fact that the Friedrich Rebbe sent out, in Russia, right? In the Pace, right? When the Friedrich Rebbe was there, and he was basically trying to keep Yiddishkeit alive.
Right.
And he would send people to be a malamed or a sheikhet or whatever it is, and you knew that they're going to face the firing squad. They're not going to survive. And the Rebbe would talk about the fact that to go on Mesiras Nefesh yourself, no, say there, okay. But to send someone else to go on Mesiras Nefesh, that takes really breite places. The Rebbe will talk about this, about the Friedrich Rebbe, that the Mesiras Nefesh that Friedrich Rebbe had to have to send someone to go. And it's not just about facing the firing squad. What happens with the Almana and the Yisayimim and all of that?
Right.
These are all things that definitely the Friedrich Rebbe thought about, etc. But there's a fire burning. Judaism is falling apart. We have to save it.
Right.
And so I think a lot. The Rebbe has a world. He has to bring Mashiach to this world. Right. This is his job, and the only way to do it is actually to send people to be there physically on the ground. It doesn't work with sending America shluchim to go in for 2 weeks, come in and out. And this is what we have to do. And there are definitely challenges. And I think when people
go ahead.
When people talk about look at shluchim's kids and they come out so wonderful, etc. I think what they're trying to harp on is that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that even the Kal Shebakalim, even someone who's totally uneducated with Judaism, is willing to go on Mesiras Nefesh, is willing to give up his life. And I think the point of it there is the fact that someone who knows about Yiddishkeit has a chinuch and has a commitment to Judaism and is willing to die. Okay, we could explain it. But the fact that a guy just found out yesterday that he's Jewish is willing to die, that's the huge deal. And I think what they're trying to say is that Melech chinuch in a Lubavitch environment, etc. Okay, you could expect that to happen. But they're living in Hong Kong, they're living in El Paso, etc., and still the kids should come out okay. That's huge. And when you see that happening, so people are like, oh, look at the special, unique quality of that type of chinuch.
I mean that part I understand, but I've heard it. I mean, somebody said it literally on this podcast a few weeks ago that like shluchim's kids, they have an advantage in the sense that they are brought up, kind of pushing the message as opposed to accepting the message of the work.
My only pushback to that is it's not just shluchim's kids. I've seen plenty of kids growing up.
I'm just saying it was just an example to me, and I've heard it so many times growing up where like like I said, this podcast isn't for airing dirty laundry. I mean, I've heard all kinds of nonsense, as we all have. I mean, if there's plenty of nonsense that I have said in my life, and I hope people don't go quoting it on a podcast. So you just brought up this very interesting kind of contrast, to me at least, where the Fidik Rebbe was talking about the firing squads, and I was talking about the Fidik Rebbe. And that's where the idea of places comes in, which is how I always understood it. Places is responsibility, not that like I'm gonna make it all work out in the way you want to. There's a very big story here where people are gonna get hurt, or people may get hurt. It's very possible, very very probable that they're gonna get hurt, but there's an equation, right? There's an equation. But I think what I wanted to ask you was, how much do you think we're hurt by the fact how much do you think we are hurt by the fact that the images of like the Rebbe crying by a farbrengen, or crying, the stories of the Rebbe crying when he saw a video was of the children in Russia, for example, and then when it comes to the kinnis and shluchim in general, the images that we have are like this, and everybody dancing, and like there's like it almost seems like like I'm not blaming anybody for doing this intentionally. I feel, because you brought up this idea of Russia, and right away what came to my head was like they would cry about the Jews in Russia, and like you knew how painful it was, and like how painful it was for the Fidik Rebbe, right? And like they didn't know what to do. Like you said, they're like either your chassidim will assimilate themselves, because that's what was going to happen if they tried to. There was no way. It wasn't like there was a place where they could go and hide. They were going to be assaulted, or they were going to try to push back, and people were going to get killed. Like, what are you supposed to do as a leader? It's impossible. It's a terrible place to be. So, like when you talk about Russian Jewry, the Rebbe's crying, right? Like that's the image that comes to my head, at least, and I'm sure it comes to a lot of people's heads. When it comes to Shlichus in America, it's all uplift and kashal bracha and the shluchim dancing for 3 hours at the kinnis and so on. Like, I'm not saying there isn't a side of that I understand, but what would it look like, and what would you think if we knew that they ever cried for shluchim's kids as well?
So you bring up a point that actually I've never thought about, and thank you for bringing. I mean, I'm going to talk while thinking. Basically, that's what's going to happen.
That's not. Now we're getting started. Now I can press record.
So, simcha, or being upbeat, doesn't necessarily equate everything is great.
Right.
Just think about, for example, I mean, right now we're in the middle of the war in Israel, right? So as soon as I heard the news on Shmini Atzeres by day, people come at the show and they tell you, I right away thought about the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War broke out on Yom Kippur, and 2 days later, the Rebbe had a farbrengen in Gimel Tishrei, right? The Rebbe starts off and says, how could we have a farbrengen? Our brothers and sisters are fighting, and, Yidden are fighting in Eretz Yisrael. How could we have a union of simcha? I'm not going to chazer the entire farbrengen, but the point is, the Rebbe explains that simcha is actually going to have a positive impact on them. Then at a certain point, after the Maimer, there's a sikha where the Rebbe talks about Eretz Yisrael, about the war. And the Rebbe speaks about that the reason why it's happening is because there was a lot of talk from the leaders to give away land, etc. And we're going to make an announcement here that what they said is not really their own opinion, and they don't speak on behalf of Klal Yisrael. It was only the Yetzer Hara trying to convince them things. And we're going to make that a charaza here, and everyone's going to say Amen. And the Rebbe's obviously doing something very heavenly, like he's trying to neutralize some type of problem. And the sikha, it's a 10-minute sikha, it ends, and 70 is roaring Amen, and then it's quiet for 2 minutes. I've never heard such a thing by farbrengen. I've listened to a lot of farbrengens, watched them. There's never really a quiet moment for more than 10 seconds, if at all. For 2 whole minutes, it's quiet. And then all of a sudden, the Rebbe starts to sing Vesamachta. But Vesamachta. And the first time that I heard that Farbrengen, it shook me. I was like, the Rebbe is very keenly aware of what's going on. Yud Gimel Tishrei, Israel was losing.
Right.
And that's when the 2,700 soldiers were dying.
Right.
Things didn't turn around until Sukkot.
And nobody thought
That it would turn around.
Right.
It was
yeah.
whatever they were
People
saying
forget,
in Israel.
Yeah, people forget. Yeah,
It was very, very bad.
very bad.
And the Rebbe just explained why it's so bad. And the Rebbe is trying to do something, whatever he was doing, in order to like neutral. And there's like these two, and in the room you have people that are from Eretz Yisrael, they have family there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the whatever. And here all of a sudden the Rebbe just starts V'samachta, and the entire Tishrei going forward was only about Simcha.
Right.
Was the Rebbe ignoring the issues? No. So getting back to the question, with regard to Shlichus and with America, at least the image that we have, or that's been imposed, or it's been characterized with, is that Rebbe, with a wave of his hand, sending shluchim out, etc.
Right.
The older I get, the more I realize that does not equate. There's no issues, there's no pain. On the contrary, and the way we deal with it is trying to just infuse more simcha and more chayas into the situation. A shliach that's having a problem. I was just reading a letter in Igris where apparently this person was writing to the Rebbe that they did certain avedas. I don't know. You can only guess what people wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe writes back to them. So 1 second, you want to deal with the aveda by doing another aveda, which means to be ba'atzvus, like to be depressed. Like what? That's not going to help you. Right. On the contrary, be b'simcha, do another mitzvah, whatever. It's like typical. But here the Rebbe spells it out. You're going to deal with a problem by adding another problem. So again, with regard to Russian Jewry and the Rebbe crying, I mean, over there you're talking about people are dying and people can't eat, and let's not equate Russian Jewry and the challenges that they had in the times of the Frierdiker Rebbe to the challenge of Shlichus. It's a different type of challenge.
Fair point.
And I think therefore the reaction to it, it's fair to say that even though it's a simcha reaction, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have the human side or the how you say, the awareness or acknowledgement of either the personal pain someone may be having, the challenges they're having, and things like that.
I mean, very fair points. Very fair points. Yeah, I mean, my thought experiment was not so much to say that the Rebbe didn't feel this way or that way based on how it seems. It's more like I feel that's how we've associated things, right? The association is, I think that's pretty evident that that's how we associate it. And I feel like, I mean, you're making a point that because we saw the Rebbe being ma'eded shluchim, and because that's kind of the surface image that comes to mind, that doesn't mean that the Rebbe wasn't acutely aware of things going on. I mean,
and you see that in the letters and in the minus and all of that.
If anyone knew what shluchim were going through, it was Rebbe who was getting letters all the time from shluchim who were complaining. I mean, I know, and I'm only saying this because my mother made it public. Is my parents my mother wanted to leave a number of times and wrote to the Rebbe a number of times. This is before Gimel Tammuz, let alone after. But and the Rebbe answered her at least once. So he knew what was going on. So my argument was not that he didn't know. My argument is simply that, or it's really a thought experiment, is that because we've associated the Rebbe's simcha with shlichus, it feels like blasphemy to suggest, wait a second, this is a much more complicated story than people present. And again, I want to be careful. I am not trying to blast shlichus. Right? This is not a vendetta. Just because I personally am not on shlichus today does not mean that I'm against it. It doesn't mean that I don't see the positives in it. Okay, I by and large, I can extol its virtues. I can extol its successes. And people also talk about the problems of shlichus. You always have to ask, but what would have been the problems if there wasn't shlichus, right? Everything is, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. So that's not my point. My point is only that, it does seem that, we almost feel like an obligation to defend not just shlichus, but the perfection of shlichus.
Right. I'll share with you, a friend of mine, my age, went on shlichus. He went to. I always say I went back home. My wife went on shlichus.
Right.
She's from Crown Heights, but
I wanted to ask you about that. I'll ask you soon. Yeah.
A friend of mine who didn't grow up on shlichus, Lubavitcher, He opened up a Chabad house in a faraway place or whatever. And one time he's a very chassidishe guy. I mean, like, I look up to him. And he was talking to me once, and he was complaining that every time that he writes the Rebbe, he's kvetching. Like, that it's so hard and so this and so that. Like, he feels guilty that all he has to share is that he has problems and issues and whatever. So I said, some of the most beautiful, responses, letters that we have to shluchim, about shluchim, one of the most famous ones. Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak Hecht from New Haven wrote to the Rebbe, that's it, I'm giving, the Rebbe should send someone that's better suited for this to take over. And the Rebbe writes back to him, Terem Yikravani Ena, I already sent the perfect candidate, I already sent the guy that could do it, his name is Moshe Yitzchak Hecht, you should get to know him,
Right.
Beautiful, right? Very nice. And then I said, let's take a step back for a second. Do you realize what prompted that response? This big chassid, he was a chassidishe. I mean, the Rebbe spoke about him, when he passed away in Tafshan Beis, and he wanted to leave.
Right.
He was complaining to the Rebbe, and that's what prompted this tremendous response. Right. You said that, my grandmother. So, Mrs. Gorelick from Milan, and it's a famous story. She was once she was giving a shir in Lugano, in Switzerland, it's nearby Milan. The Rebbe had actually told my grandparents that they should teach chassidus there.
Right.
Whatever, it's a long story, but she
told me this story once.
Oh, she said it on the pod. Oh.
No, I think a different project. Yeah.
So she would always prepare 2 sichos because she would give a shir to the girls, like the younger girls in Lugano, and then she would give a shir to the women, and she would do 2 different sichos so that the girls who came to the shir also would hear something new. Anyway, she came to the women's shir and she said over the sicha, and they said, "Let's hear more." So she said over the sicha that she said to the girls. Then they said, "Can we hear more?" And her mind was blank. She didn't, It's fine, no problem. She did what she had to do, and the entire train ride back to Milan, she was beating herself up. I'm the shliach, I'm the shlucha, I'm the one that's supposed to be bringing, the mayonas of chassidus, and I have nothing to say. And she wrote a whole letter to the Rebbe basically saying that he should have sent someone else to Milan, one of the smarter girls in her Beis Yaakov class would have done a better job or whatever. She said she didn't get a response directly to that letter, but later on, she had sent something else, a whole other story about the school, and the Rebbe sent her a beautiful letter describing the difference between, wheat and a tree, fruits from a tree. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but that was basically saying that when things are hard, that means that you're doing something right, and there's going to be proper paytas. And then the Rebbe in the next paragraph says, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but the point was that this that you say that someone else should have been here, are you doubting my judgment? So, something like that was like the message. And okay, so that my grandmother got this letter. The way I see it is, in life, whenever we fail or we're faced with challenges, and we say, "Oh, I'm so not good at this, and I'm lacking this experience, and I don't have this talent, and whatever." So like, why am I even doing this? And I remember, by the way, you think that Rebbe didn't know that? He knew that you're this and you're that and whatever it is, and he's sending you to do the mission. And the fact that he sent you, that itself should be inspiring to you. Mm-hmm. That's not going to take away the challenges. You will have challenges. And I'm sure a lot of the challenges that people have on Shlichus has to do with their own personal personality or their own personal circumstances. It's not, you can't make a cookie cutter, all the shluchim that are in these types of cities are going to have these types of challenges. That's not true. And so what I'm saying is, I think we have to realize that first of all, in life, nothing is, perfect and nothing is smooth. No matter what we go into chinuch, go into business, go into anything. Life has its challenges. Anyone that tells you that they found the perfect path to life that has 0 hiccups, I mean, I guess they don't have a pulse. And Shlichus has its fair challenges.
Right. It was interesting is that the 2 stories that you told me there, I had a very different takeaway from it. I'm not disputing what you said, but what resonated, what I heard from it was, I mean, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. The chassid wavelength and the Rebbe wavelength are very different wavelengths, right? It's a famous Hayom Yom that Amal, the Rava and the Talmidim relent and the Uftu of Chassidus, the Getliche Uftu of Chassidus, right? Is an expression like the Getliche, like the miraculous divine. It's not Stam Uftu. It's like the divine Uftu of Chassidus is that the Rebbe is Nishtalent, the Chassidim are Nishtalent. What, that they all could sit in a room together and fabring and listen to the Rebbe fabring? That's what we're talking about? No. talking about is that we're talking about people that are on very different wavelengths. And according to the Teres Chassidus, we're talking about infinitely different wavelengths, right? And so, one of the challenges that you have when you, let's say, read Igros, for example, is you're only getting the Rebbe's wavelength, right? So, like the story of Moshe Yitzchak Hecht, who happens to be a grandfather, my brother-in-law,
Right.
right? So you figured
Bentzi.
it, you figured
Bentzi,
it out,
okay.
yeah. So I'm saying I've heard this story, and I've heard a lot.
By the way, in Chicago, I went to Mivtzayim with him.
Okay.
He taught me how to do Mivtzayim in the big building.
And now I can for sure turn on the record button. Yeah. So I mean, I've heard a lot about him and what kind of character he was, but like this, the letter you hear is that the Rebbe already sent, or the Rebbe's judgment, like, and that's the Rebbe's wavelength because the Rebbe's writing it. But like what you said to your friend was, you realize what his point was, what this chassid's point was, is he couldn't do it. And I'm saying like that. Again, I'm not saying that I dispute what you're saying. All I'm saying is that like I paid attention when you brought them up to more like there are two wavelengths here. Your grandmother and this Rabbi Hecht were both on their wavelengths, racked by terrible self-doubt. Because in general, people have self-doubt. Especially here, you're talking about Shlichus. This is a new thing. Everybody's kind of on their own, starting from scratch. They don't really know what they're even meant to be doing, why they're here, or what defines success.
All right.
Also, I mean, at the beginning, a lot of shluchim asked.
I like how you said that. What defines success? Okay.
Yeah, they didn't know what defines success. They asked Rabbi Chadikov, what are you supposed to do? One guy got an answer, sell kahas for him. My Zayda in Philadelphia got an answer, do everything that starts with an aleph and everything that starts with the base and everything that starts with the gimel. Like, I mean, I think even the Rebbe may have given them that answer. I don't know who he got it from exactly, but I think he may have heard that directly from the Rebbe. The point is that that's not a very concrete answer.
It's not a 9 to 5 deal.
No, it's on the chassid's wavelength. That's also not an answer. Like, okay, I asked you what to do and you told me to do everything. What is that? Like, that's why I asked. Right. I want to know what to do, not like what there is to do. But so what I take away from it is that Shlichus in many ways brings that distance, or that disjunction, like the two different wavelengths. Focus. It brings it into the sharpest focus possible, right? Because here you have now suddenly. You have the Rebbe's mission of Shlichus, that the shliach is living on a daily basis, right? The Rebbe says you're going to go on Shlichus, and this is what's needed now to bring Mashiach, right? I think generally speaking, that's what it is, right? I mean, there are specifics and different ways of interpreting it, and what exactly it looks like, and so on. But that's what it is, right? You're going to devote your life to being Mekar Yidin and Dir B'Tachteinim, right? And that will bring Mashiach. Okay, so that's Rebbe's wavelength. The shliach's wavelength is trying to live that wavelength, but also dealing with all of life, right? And that tension is crazy, right? That tension is crazy. I mean, that's what I heard when you bring up those two things, is that like we very often, people like learn the Igros, or people, like. You listen to a Fabring, and whatever it is that people do, we kind of get intoxicated with the Rebbe's wavelength, and that might be a beautiful thing for whoever it works for, but we have to be aware that it doesn't automatically translate into the chassid's wavelength. Is what I'm saying. So
I'll just get back to the reason I was bringing up the stories is because my friend was feeling guilty that he was kvetching, and I was like, "Why are you feeling guilty?" That's what all of them did.
Right.
All of our heroes, all of our shluchim heroes.
Okay, so
they kvetched all the time.
So you were bringing up the same point as me.
Yes. What I was trying to share with him was, when the Rebbe sends us on shlichus, he doesn't turn us into tzaddikim or super people.
Right. Okay.
We're still the same person, and the Rebbe knows that, and we should know that. I mean, if we don't, then we have a problem.
Oh, so when you said that, when you brought up the story with your grandmother, that the Rebbe, do not trust my judgment, you were not saying that you should be bottled with Kabbalah.
No.
Okay.
I was just saying that if someone looks at my, and she is a very special woman, and she is a heroic shlucha, right. And from the Nachshonim, from the first ones that went out,
right.
I mean, I think they're the first ones that left America to go overseas on shluchas. Like it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Until then, the people, whatever. I don't have to go into details, but the point is, people look up to her and say, wow, look at that. I wish I could be like her, right?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? She also kvetched.
Right.
And more than once.
Right.
And that doesn't make her not a shlucha and not a chassid and not, like, this is who we are.
That is the definition of chassidim. I mean, there is a danger of me falling into a rant here, which I will not do.
I should stop you? Okay.
I will not do. But, there's a famous story of Rabbi Yosef Masbir, the
Balagala, yeah.
Balagala, and
Beshinkovich, or
yeah, and I remember reading it in the Frierdiker Rebbe's writings. I think I read it at the Akdama of Pikei Chibur. I'm sure it's published elsewhere as well. And that whole story is about his doubt, because the Alter Rebbe never told him specifically to go right now and be a Balagal. The Alter Rebbe gave him like a siman that if and this and this happens,
you should be a balagala.
If something has to happen first. Something had to happen.
Oh,
I don't remember. Look at it. Because it's the story. Because he was like, I'm not sure if this is what I'm meant to be doing, and his wife had to push him over.
The Alter Rebbe was very clear what he should do, but it didn't make sense. He
went
to the
right
thing.
away. It happened years later. So there was a siman that had to happen. There's a siman that had to happen. The point that I'm saying is that the story is all about his doubt, and he was broken about his doubt. What kind of chassid am I that I even have doubt? Should I do it? Should I not do it? And it was his wife who told him, if you even have a svara that the Rebbe told you to do this, what's a shaila? And even then he was broken. Because what the heck am I doing here? I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense to me. Why am I cleaning up a horse's drek? It makes no sense. Why am I schlepping people around? And it doesn't even seem, if I remember correctly, it doesn't even seem once the story kind of played out and he saved this person's neshama that he was like, okay, amazing. This was a great story. He's still upset. Like, I don't know.
Whatever.
Okay, maybe the word's not upset. He's still conflicted. Like, it's not a story of triumph. And then I think it was only later that because it was at that point I think the Alter Rebbe already passed away, and so yeah. So this is a story. The way that I read it, I'm pretty sure this is the way it's written. It's a story of a chassid overcoming doubt and living with that doubt and trying in face of that doubt to do what the Rebbe asked him to do, right? Because the reason I say that he wasn't even sure, because I wish I would have read it before I spoke to you. Well, it's a proof that I wasn't planning this rant, right? like the Mitzvah Rebbe told him something to like ease him. Like there was something that like he told him something to make him feel better about it. My point is, that's not even my main point. My main point is that when I was growing up, I heard the story too. And that's not at all how I heard the story. And that's not how anybody listening to this heard the story.
I have a lot to say about stories being told in different ways.
But it's not what happened in the story. It's how the story was told. The point of the story is always, look at the Alter Rebbe, what kind of Ruach HaKodesh he had, that he knew to send a chassid and put him in this place so that one... Okay, now, first of all, that doesn't make any sense. Because if the Alter Rebbe had Ruach HaKodesh, which he knew he did have Ruach HaKodesh, then he could have told this guy on this and this day, be a Balgala for a day, or get training for a week and be in the right place at the right time. He didn't have to take 10 years of his life to be a Balgala, right? So obviously there's more to the story than just that. There's something more that's going on here. The Alter Rebbe understood something that maybe we don't understand, perhaps, right? But more than that, the point that when you're telling a story, there's always a point to the story, right? The line is, never make a point without telling a story, and never tell a story without it making a point. Every story has a point. What's the point of this story? You read the Frierdiker Rebbe the way he wrote it, it's all about the chassid. It's all about the chassid. The Alter Rebbe tells him to do something, now he's left on his own. He's not sure if this is what the Alter Rebbe meant or not. He's not sure if he's up to it, and he overcomes it and he does. It's all about him. Him, all the way through. The way it's told to us, it's all about the Alter Rebbe. What happened? Right? Why am I bringing this up now? Because that's what you're just talking about now. What you're talking about is that there is a chassid here. There are these big heroes, these big shluchim heroes, these big people that populate our imagination of what it means to be a derech shvi chassid. These people were real people dealing with real issues, dealing with real struggles, and we kind of overlook it sometimes.
And it's not a stira. That's the point.
That's a point. That's a point. I'm agreeing with you.
Not a contradiction.
That's not the point. But something happened. I don't know when, and you're not that much older than me, so maybe you have source when it happened. I don't know if you like. I don't know if you would. It certainly didn't happen in the 2 years or whatever age gap we have, but something happened at some point where we went from telling stories of Chassidim to everything being a story of the Rebbe, right? Like there's a beautiful part, a big part, and an indispensable part of being a Chassid, and the whole story of Chassidus in total is a story of the Chassid as well, right?
Yeah, of course.
And the story of Shlichus is the story of the Mishaleach, but it's also the story of the Shluchim, and it's also the story of the Shluchim's kids, who have to,
Experience the challenge.
Have to say goodbye to their
Right.
parents.
Right.
Bid farewell to their parents at the airport. That's also part of the story.
Of course. Of course.
And there is no story without that.
Right. Right.
So
You asked me a question.
yeah.
I don't think you're asking me for a timeline. You're not asking me to like kind of identify when did the storytellers change their track, because I don't think that's really what happened.
Right.
I can't say that I fully agree with your analysis of how every story is told or how we're. And the truth is, we're two different people, so it could be you heard one thing and I'm hearing something else.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And also, I'm keenly aware of the fact that I
mean,
haven't.
You don't agree that in general stories became more Rebbe centric.
Depends. In other words, depends what you mean by that. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
For the longest time, I've been hearing stories about people.
Okay.
I'll give you a simple example, right? So my father, when he was 15 years old, he came to New York for Tishrei, and he stayed, basically till he got married, which is a story for itself, I imagine. And he had his own, experience, but he was here for 10 years by the Rebbe, and I distinctly remember that I think it was 13 or 14. It was in the summer. We were in Crown Heights for a Shabbos. I remember it was the first time that I had a conversation with my father. He just started to talk about his experiences in 770, whatever, being in Crown Heights near the Rebbe from when he was 15 and on. And it was very much about him, him experience, he would go very hungry sometimes and whatever. And nothing, he wasn't like telling me over Farbrengens or whatever. It was just his experience there. And I distinctly remember that being the first conversation that actually drew me into what we call Beis Chayenu. Like, it drew me into this world of like, the goings on in 770, which are extremely Rebbe-centric, obviously.
Right.
But there's also like this huge amount of arum that's going on, and there's people that are experiencing it.
Right. You know why you could identify with it? Because you could see yourself in the story.
Oh, well, okay, because of the homesickness you're saying?
No,
in general,
no,
I'm a chassid, he's a chassid, I could have been there.
Yeah.
And that's true. So,
but you are kind of proving my point, because you're telling me it's the first time that you're hearing these kind of stories.
When I was 14.
Oh, this is
I'm saying when I was 14, I was a young bacher.
Right, but you're hearing it from your father privately.
Yeah, no, my father was telling me.
You're bringing me an example.
No, I'll explain to you what I mean.
Right. Okay.
I'm just saying and since that was one of my first conversations I had with anyone about 770, so going forward, the way I kind of took things in, even though yes, every story is only really a story if it didn't have to do with the Rebbe. If you're talking about a story of 770, there's a lot of silly stories out there. You know what I'm saying? Just on people doing things. But even when it's a story about the Rebbe, because I had that conversation with my father, I think that's one of the reasons. I was able to kind of envision, or not envision, but to realize there's people here that are seeing what's going on, that are hearing what the Rebbe is saying, that are acting upon it, whatever. So at least in my mind, it was never romanticized too much.
I see.
Out of control, without losing the kedusha and So again, that's why I can't fully agree with your characterization of how, in general, stories of Derech Shvi are told that they're completely Rebbe-centric when
that wasn't your experience. No,
right.
I mean, fair enough. I mean, that's valid. That's valid.
It's definitely the words that people are saying. You're 100% correct. But then the question is always, how are people taking it?
I mean, that's what I'm talking about. Look, I mean, what you're saying is very valid. I also was lucky to have, I had my Zayda who told me all kinds of stories in the first person. Right. So his relationship with Rebbe was a very unique relationship, and was always I could see him there. So in a way, I could see myself there. So personally, I agree with you that I didn't feel like it was just the Rebbe, nothing else. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't aware that the way stories are told and the point of the story is always, in the end, the point of the story is the Rebbe was right. Right. At the end of
Sorry about that. Okay.
you know what I'm saying?
I hear, yeah,
look,
100%.
And I am sure that for some people that does a world of good, but there's and also there's no doubt that that's a massive part of the story.
Right.
Right? There's no doubt. But all I'm saying is, and for some people it might be more of the story and some people less of the story, depending on how much the Rebbe occupies your life. Fine, open to all of that. All I'm saying is that there's also another part of the story. Okay, someone will say I'm trying to like, really I mean that it's more of the story. It's a part of the story for every person. They'll decide how much of the story this is and how much of the story that is. At the end of the day, that it's not for anybody to decide for anybody else. But I do feel like it's certainly part of the story, and and in a way, hopefully this conversation did a little bit of justice to a part of the story that, God knows needs to be a much bigger part of the story. And like people will say, why are you bringing up these kind of topics? Why are you bringing up the challenges of Shlichus? And we haven't even scratched the surface, baby. Like,
We just started the conversation.
I'm just saying, like, no, I'm talking about this specific topic of leaving home. I could go on for hours. It seems like you are a little bit more blasé about it, at least publicly. But I know. God knows what I've heard. But why am I bringing it up? Because is it to break the silence or break the taboo or whatever? No,
I didn't know that there is a taboo.
No, I'm saying it's because to me it doesn't diminish the story of Shlichus at all.
Exactly.
It doesn't diminish the story. It doesn't diminish the story of Shlichus. And even if, like my brother and I discussed, that we believe, and not everyone has to agree with this, that mistakes were made and people did things that were wrong or that things need to be changed.
That could be true.
Yeah, I'm saying that could also, even if you agree with us with what we discussed, that these are true, that's also part of the story. Until Mashiach comes, mistakes are being made and things are going wrong. Now, that doesn't give an excuse to therefore, so that's always how it's been. Let's just keep on, kicking the can down the road. Hopefully things are changing, and I think in many ways they are. And at the end of the day, people are living their lives. They don't want their kids to go through what they went through. They want to fix the things that went wrong for them, for their kids. People are going to try to improve things, right? So it's not. I don't feel like I'm the guy saying that things should get better. Everybody knows that, right? My point is merely that we can talk about Shlichus and talk about the humanity of it and the side of it that's difficult, without diminishing the story, right?
Yeah, of course.
Oid Yeser, you could say that there is no good story in the world that's ever been written that doesn't deal with the pain. And I'm talking about fiction, but really it's any story. There's a famous writer, I think it was Tolstoy, who said that every family dies the same, or every happy family has the same story. It's the sad families that have interesting story. And he starts one of his biggest novels with that line. But it's true about any good story that you hear. It could even be a chassidishe maase when you think about it. A chassidishe maase that doesn't have pain in it, doesn't have a little bit of suffering in it. It doesn't mean anything to you, because what does it do for me? Good for them, like La La Land. Good for you. Right. This is the story. This is a story of people who went out and went out because they were trying to be part of the Rebbe's mission, and they didn't know what it would mean for their kids, and then they realized it would mean some hard things for their kids, and they very often didn't know what to do about it, and they persevered, and maybe made mistakes. That's also part of the story.
In Tafshin, I think it's Tafshin Mamches by the Kinos HaShluchim. If you look at the Sikh over there, the Rebbe talks about the fact that shluchim have gone out, and you see that they were successful in the chinuch of their kids, and they have parnasa, and they made shidduchim. If you think about it, Tafshin Yud, let's put it this way, the story of Shlichus actually does not make sense on paper.
That's a very good point.
That, in other words, you're saying like, there's an abstraction. It makes sense on paper. Actually, it does not make sense on paper.
That's a very valid point.
And logically speaking, it doesn't make it. In Tafshin Yud Yud Aleph, for the Rebbe to plan on taking all of his talmidim and sending them out, etc., it was contrary to any type of normal way of rebuilding Judaism after the Holocaust.
The Chassidim were against it.
Exactly.
The big Chassidim were against it.
So on paper, it didn't work out.
Right.
30 years later, the Rebbe says, I have the goods to show for it. Right. And you see that in the Kinnos HaShluchim Amches, the Rebbe made a big shturim. The Rebbe said, it's in bold in the Muga. It's a kriya to all the Talmidim that are here, all the Bachrim, veert shluchim and neemt ein de Welt mit Yiddishkeit. Right. And as the Rebbe saying, okay, I have a Kinnos here, all the shluchim came back. Look at them. I mean, they're humans, right? They're not all tzaddikim, and not necessarily everything worked out. But for the main part, this is working. They have children, they're making shidduchim, they're grandparents already. Now you don't just have to trust me. Now you could just see what's going on.
I mean, that kind of undercuts your earlier point. The first point that you make is a great point about it only began working on paper years later. But
I didn't say that it starts to work on paper.
Yeah, it still doesn't.
In other words, that's
fundamentally
what
it doesn't work on paper.
So I think this is the Rebbe's way of basically saying, ich hab breite Plätzes.
Right, but it kind of undercuts your point that you said earlier, which is that doesn't define the success of shlichus one way or another. That's
also true, but if everything would fail, right? If it wouldn't work out at all, if it's completely not feasible, then what are we doing, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very good point that you're making, and I think it's also very important to make that point because whenever you engage in any kind of conversation of critique, very often it's disproportionate in the terms of the conversation, right? Because all we're talking about is this one point, and it's like it could magnify the issue and make it sound like the whole thing fell apart. And it's like, wait a second, a lot of good happened here, right? There's a lot of good here. And I guess there's a mission that is happening. There's a lot of good. Yeah. So to wrap things up a little bit and bring things full circle, the one of the we both grew up on Shlichus, in varying distances from New York. Although I tip my hat to you, that's for sure. although it turns out, I mean, COVID kind of did a number on Hong Kong, but it turns out that we had a direct flight to New York when you didn't. So, whatever. I mean, I had a direct flight to Chicago. I have to say, who needs to go to Chicago? No, I'm saying in my case, in order to go to my chinuch, right? Let's put it this way: it's not like I was traveling a full day to get to where I had to be to. And also, my parents always told me, whenever you want to come home for a Shabbos, you can come. They never ever told me. I think this is an important point. At least that works for me. My parents never told me we don't have money to bring you in. Or only once in 2 months. They said whenever you want to come, you can come, and I never took them up. Right. I came back every once in 2 months. Between Tishrei and then Hanukkah and then winter vacation and then Pesach. It was it worked out that way for me. My parents were very very adamant that I should know that you can come home whenever you want. So that, in other words, I don't want to say that we all had the same, how you say, circumstances and, No, but I mean, I didn't understand it that way. I also don't, to me, when I think about going away from home, I don't think about it like a 10-hour flight. I mean, it sounds even more ridiculous when you put it that way. Like, I didn't only fly 2 hours away. I didn't only fly 10 hours away. I flew 10 hours away to a different continent. Right. Okay. And the big coup in my case was that we found a city that was a 10-hour flight away, but it was only a 2-hour time difference. Australia. So this way I could call my parents during the day, and I wasn't like, but I couldn't fly home every other Shabbos. That was just nothing to do with money. It was money was never the issue that I knew of. It was just like, like by the time you would fly back, you'd just be home the whole time. But I didn't understand. I didn't understand that you were saying that everyone has the same story, and within my family we had different stories and different circumstances and different situations. And I've heard stories of shluchim's kids who left home to go an hour drive or 2-hour drive, and they would come home every Shabbos. And they also had tough times. And it was devastating for them. Right. It's about the child. It's about the parents. It's about where they stay. It's about their class. Right? If you don't get along with your classmates in your new school, it makes you miserable. If you do get along, it definitely helps. There's so many things. I'm sure not all your siblings had the same exact experience,
Nope,
right? You don't have to
I
talk
know.
for them, but I'm sure they didn't all have the same experience. So that's not the point. The point is more just the point that we've made the points. But what I wanted to kind of close with is one of the differences, besides the varying lengths of our flights to school, is that you went back home and you continued. You went back. You went
Right.
back to where it all started and started the cycle again. Um, was this something that ever factored in for you? Realizing that, like we just said, just because it worked out for you, the odds are not entirely stacked in your favor. Do you want to do that all over again? And also realizing that, like you said earlier, as hard as it was for you, it was even harder for your father. Now you're the father.
Right. Honestly speaking, I did not make any in-depth analysis. Let's put it this way: the chinuch of Shlichus, or the chinuch in Lubavitch, where a friend of mine said, if I would know how hard Shlichus was, I wouldn't go. Right. And
Right.
so my thing, okay, so thank God you didn't know how hard it was.
Yeah.
But what's my point?
Right.
At a certain point, and it could be it always was in my psyche, I had made that decision. I'm going to be a shliach one day. I want to be a shliach one day. And by the way, I never took that for granted.
Right.
What I mean by that is, I know others that, let's say, grew up in the same situation. They didn't end up on shlichus for various reasons, right? So I can never know for sure what's going to happen. It all depends on who you marry and if they're ready to do it, etc. But I never really overanalyzed the situation and said, oh, am I ready to send my child away? Am I ready for that type of experience? It's like, I made the commitment to go on shlichus, and if that shlichus means I go back home to El Paso, then yes. And I'm acutely aware that it's going to be challenging, but this is the game. This is what we're doing. So I think just for myself, it was healthier not to dwell on what's going to happen and how will it be, because you never know. You really never know how your children are going, what their character is going to be, what their disposition, if it's going to be easier for them or harder for them, and when you're going to send them away from home. So honestly, I didn't find it, at least for me, I never really thought about that. I just thought about, I want to go on shlichus, and here's an opportunity. We're going to do this.
And now,
I don't dwell on it. Things are tough sometimes. Baruch Hashem, I'm by my parents, and they're very good, very supportive, very helpful. They're friginers. I'm saying I don't have to translate what that. I don't know if you could even translate
you're still
that.
working with your father after 10 years.
Yeah, I'm working with the father, and I'm very happy there, and I'm very
That's the biggest
thankful.
compliment you could give.
Exactly, I'm still there, and I'm very thankful. And I have no other plans. I'm
talking more about your kids.
Right. So even with my children, Baruch Hashem, there's an online school, so that helps. But again, that's not that doesn't automatically mean that the child is going to take to the class and be able to sit in front of the computer screen the whole day, etc. It's a daily, ongoing challenge,
right?
And you make it work. This is or you try to make it work. Sometimes it just doesn't.
Right.
But this is it. It's not like I'm thinking to myself, maybe I should be doing something else. What would I gain from that?
Right.
Also, 70 years after Shlichus has been ongoing, I could have a certain confidence in the fact that this could work. I mean, proof to that, I'm here, and we'll make this work as best as we can.
Right.
But the main thing is, I never feel guilty complaining to myself, like, oh man, this is tough. So why are you complaining? You're supposed to be a shliach. It's always b'simcha. This is part of simcha. You know what I mean? Being in tune with what's going on, it's part of simcha.
Right.
Next.
You're allowed to have a tough day. You're allowed to have doubts. Are you allowed to have doubts?
Sure, why not?
No.
But I have to identify where they're coming from. I know they're coming from the Yetzer Hara, and
Okay.
You're allowed to have everything and anything. You can't control that.
Right.
You can't control doubts.
Right.
You could ignore it. You can convince yourself you're not having them. But
Right. So when you come to the kinnis, we're sitting here in Crown Heights in the thick of the kinnis. This is, and we can wrap up with this. I know you have to go. One of the things my brother discussed was that, he couldn't really identify with the kids in Hong Kong because he was a rabbi's son, and he couldn't identify with the kids he also went to Chicago, it turns out, for however long that lasted. He couldn't identify with them because he was from Hong Kong. You grew up in El Paso, you went to Yeshiva, and then you went back to El Paso. When you come to Crown Heights, do you feel like for a lot of people, Crown Heights is the place, but you're more an El Paso guy, aren't you? Like, how do you see yourself as a Lubavitcher? Are you like, is it just one long consistent path that kind of made a detour for a little bit, but El Paso all the way through, Shlichus all the way through, or do you feel at home as well in this world? And
Absolutely at home in this world.
okay,
In other words, for me personally, this is who I am.
even in Crown Heights.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, it's wonderful. Let's put it this way: coming to the kinos, it's not just about, I don't know, workshops and things like that. It's more about seeing friends and
Sure.
speaking with fellow shluchim. Not just, I mean, the Crown Heights is a neighborhood full of chassidim.
Right.
I enjoy being here. It's not the only time that I come to Crown Heights,
Right.
the kinos. So it's if you're asking if I feel absolutely at home in Lubavitch, in other words, in Lubavitch of being in this
part of Lubavitch,
Of course.
the outside of Shlichus Lubavitch.
Yeah. I mean, I have many friends who are not shluchim and chassidishe friends,
Right.
and I have some. When I come and I have a fabring, and it's not only with shluchim, and it's with
Right.
yeah, we're
Right. Look, it's I think for me the takeaway from all this is that the beautiful thing of a story is that it can hold contradictions. If anything, that's what makes a story great. We're talking about, and I know this was something that I brought up. A theory that I brought up. So whatever it's worth in the first place, but like things that work out on paper and abstractions. A story is really the opposite of an abstraction,
right.
Because a story that's too abstract doesn't work, right? Mainly because an abstraction gets too carried away with its own internal logic, and a story is all about kind of
What happened,
and finding a more human logic, a human rhythm to it, right? And it's a very different kind of logic. And I think the takeaway I get from this conversation is that, your story is one that, I think people could see on the surface that, oh yeah, we grew up in El Paso, and you live in El Paso. Yeah, it was a straight line, and okay, so good for you, right? But that's not what I think over the course of the conversation, that's not what I'm taking away from. That's not what I'm taking away from. What I'm taking away from it is that your story is one of all different kinds of parts, different contradictions, and that story can also end up back on Shlichus, right? Like, to have a story that has its own challenges and ups and downs doesn't mean you have to leave.
right.
A long way of saying, I think that's a valuable takeaway as well, and I think that's why you wanted to come on as well, is that we don't always have to. The everybody has their own story, everybody has their own journey, but not every story that's worth saying is a story. In order for a story to be worth saying, doesn't have to be a story that has, like, quote unquote, a bad ending
or a different ending or whatever.
Like
How do you get from here to there?
Right. You grew up in El Paso. You live in El Paso. You're back on Shlichus in El Paso. It seems like that's where you're going to be for a very long time. I'd be a scale tzedek, right?
Amen.
Right. And there's a story there too. There's a story worth exploring, and a story that you live, and a story worth for me to hear, and a story worth to share.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Right. Do you have any takeaways that you want to say?
I just think it's important that people should realize that we're human, and even when things look like they're working out for someone else, or they're this is like the perfect situation, perfect story, whatever. Every story has its baggage, has its thing, and it's not because of someone's decisions, someone else's mistakes, whatever. That's life.
Right.
And we just, we hope and pray that life, that we're able to overcome whatever challenges it is, and that we're able to make the right choices,
Right. Right. So thank you very much. This was a great conversation. Thank you for your time. I know the Kiddush is a busy few days, but thank you.
Hatzlach Rabba.
Hatzlach Rabba. music for this podcast comes from the album Repentance Doors by Oren Sor Nadav Vachar and is used with their permission.